That was the key teaching that motivated Martin Luther to begin what was to become the Protestant Reformation. And it's an understanding of grace and faith, justification and sanctification, in theological terms, moral and religious life, that needs to be affirmed again and again, whenever and however we start to think that we can manipulate God. Whenever and however we think that we even understand what's really going on in our lives with respect to God's will, destiny, or whatever. And today's gospel reading can also be seen as a reflection on this same source of faith in the call of Abram, in a little different way. It emphasizes the importance of starting again, just as the call to leave did. Our need to be reborn, to be born again, to be born from above, the gospel says. Our need to leave behind the comforts of our worldly existence, the stability of whatever material life that we've built up, the staked out farm fields and the symmetrical city streets where we can be in charge, and leave and open ourselves up to a wider reality, submit ourselves to a higher and deeper calling, the full nature of which we don't really understand, maybe. So Christian additions to leaving the city and the offer of a promised land include free grace and being born again, being born from above. But this morning I'd like to add a fifth element or perspective as significant for this passage from Genesis about the call of Abram. And that has to do with the idea of movement itself as a really important spiritual concept. As much as the promised land is held out as a goal in Abram's call, or at least it's been interpreted that way, to leave his country and his father's house, it's a goal that never really ever gets fully reached. As I said, the Torah stops at the entrance to the promised land. But then when all the history is written about what happens there, the coming together of the tribes and the joining together in a monarchy, all seeming to head toward the culmination of the kingship of David, the settling of Jerusalem, the building of the temple by his son Solomon. After that, everything goes on to talk about unfulfilled hopes and broken apart alliances and exiles and conquests. It's kind of like, a soap opera that builds to a climax and then goes off on another story saying, well, that was just a dream. J.R. isn't really dead, for those of you of a certain age. Or musicians who seem to come to the end of a song and then there's another thing and then it goes on. Todd never does that. And the same's kind of true for the story of Jesus. There's a kind of building, and his birth and his teaching and his call and then his entry into Jerusalem and the Last Supper and the arrest and the crucifixion and the resurrection, and then Then they're waiting for the Spirit, and then the Spirit comes, and then they're waiting, and the church starts to evolve, and it goes on. And as much as the church may try to end the story with the final words of the book of Revelation and the establishment of the hierarchical body of Christ, that doesn't seem to end it. The state of Israel may try to end it by the reconquest of Jerusalem and the building of settlements throughout Samaria and Judea. But the wandering continues. Our life is a journey, and maybe only a journey. God meets us on the journey of that life, step by step, day by day. He's not waiting out there at the end for us to get someplace. Faith is not a belief that we are simply on our way to heaven. Faith is the full acceptance of the process that we call life as it's woven by and into the greater process that we call God. It's all more about movement than it is about settlement or arrival or any particular thing. So in modern language, each of us, I think, can be understood kind of as a quantum being, as far as I understand, what the little bit I understand of what quantum physics kind of says. That matter is made up of smaller and smaller elements that act more like waves in space and time than they do like things, until you start to look at them, and then they appear like individual particles. And I've seen science shows that show that experiment of the slits and things like that. So that in a way, maybe each of our lives is more like a wave on the ocean of eternity. But when we stop and think about it, or we look at somebody else objectively, it looks like a separate entity, a physical being, a discrete human life. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's all of those at the same time. Maybe neither. I don't know. Maybe that's just a current way of understanding things. And I admit, probably that's not what the author of this story from Genesis had in mind when he or she was writing about Abram's call to leave the city, a quantum wave. But it's nice on the bulletin, don't you think? But alongside the more traditional ways of seeing it, I think that this is kind of a valid interpretation. So that what the Spirit may be saying to God's people through this is to leave behind whatever city it is that we may be stuck in. But not to obsess so much about where we want to end up, or where we have to end up, or where we think we should end up. Just be on the journey. Right here, right now. Because it's at least right here and right now that God is fulfilling the promise. It's here and now, just as God said to Abram, that all the nations of the world are being blessed by you in your life. And just as Paul says, It's right here and right now that God is calling into existence the things that don't exist in your life. This moment, the next moment. And it's here and now that we are born again, as Jesus said, born from above. And the wonder and beauty of the grace of God enfolds us in love. Thanks be to God.